Thanks for checking out the Talking the Talk with Don podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome. And if you're an old school, longtime listener, welcome back. And thank you so much for all of your support over the years. I hope you've had a chance to listen to some of the older episodes. If not, check them out. And I hope you are looking forward to the future episodes because I've got some great guests lined up that I can't wait to share with you. Just so you don't miss an episode, please subscribe. I am also on all of the streaming platforms that have podcasts, so be sure to subscribe there. I also have a Patreon page where if you sign up, you will get some cool incentives like some unedited interviews, maybe some video clips of past interviews, some behind-the-scenes photos, and anything else I might want to just throw at you. This is also what's going to keep this podcast ad-free, and I would appreciate any and all support that you can give. Thank you so much, and enjoy this episode of Talking the Talk with Don. Welcome to Talking the Talk with Don. And my guest this time around is one of the greatest people I know and one of the coolest people I know, Miss Gail Worley from the Worley Gig. And she's an incredible writer. She's got a vast history in the music industry as a writer. And I'm super pumped to have her as a friend and as a guest. So Gail, thanks for doing this.
Don, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. And I'm very excited to talk to you.
Oh, this is, well, I don't hear that enough, you know. I mean, like, it's always nice when I do hear it. So, you know, I have to say that I love the fact that I've met some of my favorite people, like who ended up becoming very close friends of mine through being a music journalist. In your time doing this as a music journalist, and even as a writer now, is that kind of a rare thing in a field where it can be very competitive?
Well, let's see. How do we answer this question? As far as becoming friends with other writers, that happened a lot more when I was in my journalism days of, when print media was around. And there was like a real scene in New York, and you could make a lot of contacts just by going to shows and, press events back when those used to actually happen. As far as making friends with some of the people I interviewed, that could occasionally happen also if you were able to make a personal connection with that person, for whatever reason. And sometimes those people are, they stay friends, and sometimes, you get really tight and then they drift away, just like any friendship. But writing is definitely a conduit to making tight friendships with like-minded people. Definitely. I mean, we met through Keefy, right?
Yeah, we were doing one of the Kiss thing. Yeah.
Was there something before that? No, it was Kiss, and then it was Slayer.
It was the Kiss and the
think that we
Slayer
did,
one. Yeah.
And a mutual friend, Ken Pierce, is someone I met when we were both writing for Metal Edge magazine, when that was a print, magazine 20 years ago or whenever that was. And then Ken introduced me to Keefy, and Keefy introduced me to you. So you can see it all kind of goes around. When I was writing about music, I was writing for Modern Drummer for 13 years, I think. And a lot of times I would interview a drummer and we would become friendly, and they would, say to me, I want you to meet my friend so-and-so. He's a really great drummer. He's really cool. I think you'd like him. And they would, we'd hook up on the phone or something. And maybe I'd go out to LA and we'd meet. And, I would pitch them to Modern Drummer and end up writing about them. And then they in turn would say, I have another friend who's a musician. He needs a bio. Do you write bios? I can't tell you how many bios I've written from being referred to by other musicians. So yeah, it's like, the circle of life. What can I say?
It's such an interesting networking circle, because I know when I started doing this, probably around like 2011 or so, I was real green into it. I was just kind of, I was just starting my blog. I was still doing it on like MySpace at the time, and kind of easing into it. And one of the things I think I noticed right away was I wasn't prepared for the competitive nature of some of it. Like writers kind of like being a little guarded or shielded or whatever. And but then it's like all it took was to meet one person, and then that person is kind of like what you said, like, oh well, let me introduce you to this person. And then all of a sudden you're surrounded by the right people. And I always thought that was such a cool thing. And it's almost that concept of like you just got to kind of poke around. And then if you find that one, then that one will lead to two, three, four, five. And then all of a sudden you become a syndicate of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. That's how my career grew. I started writing for one little local newspaper, and then I got some clips, and then I started calling some of the record labels and saying, I'm writing for this local New York City magazine. I'd like to go see the band you are promoting at, let's say, Irving Plaza. And they'd say, oh, well, let me put you on our list and we'll start sending you our music. And then I think they share their lists with other publicists and it just grows. And then people start contacting you, and suddenly I'm getting serviced by all the major record labels and getting 50 CDs a week. And another publicist said to me, Gail, these publicists that you know should be getting you writing jobs because they're the ones that need writers to cover their bands. So they should be pitching you to the magazines, which was like a revelation to me. I had never even imagined that someone would want to help me with anything. But it did happen that I had a lot of publicists refer me to jobs that I had for quite a while. Modern Drummer was a job that a publicist said, why don't you call Bill Miller at Modern Drummer and pitch him some of these drummers you're interviewing? Oh no, well they're not technical interviews. I'm just interviewing them about their band. She's like, just do it. You got to start somewhere. And I ended up writing for Modern Drummer for 13 years.
See, that's amazing because I think by the time I kind of started coming into it, obviously the print magazine was kind of had waned a good bit from
Mhm.
that. But that was always a dream of mine, was to go into something like that. And coming from the print magazine uh, medium that you were involved with, going into the digital world, did you feel like there was kind of a loss when the magazine, that like the print magazine started to kind of dwindle and the internet took over? Like, did you feel like there was a loss there for you, or did you feel like, okay, this is just something I have to embrace and move forward with?
I don't think it felt like much of a loss because I was mixing it up pretty well between print and online.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I would get an interview for an online source, and I would pitch the artist to a print magazine and then just do two different articles, like maybe do a Q&A for the online thing and a like 500 word, short editorial based piece for the print magazine. Um, you know, there was never really a lot of money in online stuff. The money was in the print, but it wasn't a lot of money either.
Yeah.
So I have always had to have a day job also. I've never really been
Mm-hmm.
able to make a living just doing writing. I think the loss that I felt was just like, isn't it sad that print is going away, that all these print outlets are closing up? Because,
Yeah.
you grow up buying rock magazines and, ripping out the pages and putting them on your bedroom wall and collecting them, and then to not have that anymore was like, oh, I felt a loss in that way. But I always stayed busy writing. I never had a lack of things to write about.
I always thought that it was like it was just such a great thing to like with the magazines, was that like the nostalgia that comes to your mind. Like I still remember going to the grocery store with my mom and me going and sitting by the magazine rack, and at Hit Parader and Circus and Faces Rocks and Metal Edge, and I'd just stack them and I would just read them while she was
Uh-huh.
shopping. But I would know that I only had one that I could get, so I'd
Uh-huh.
find the one that I knew I wanted to take home, and I would just read the other ones. And I loved that because that was like, again, that was like our internet.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
We didn't
Yeah.
we didn't get tour dates like at the snap of a finger, like, and we didn't have MTV until I was in high school. So like when I got the concert calendar out of Circus, that was when I knew where when a band was touring, and it was so exciting. And now it's just like, oh, I get an email and I get mailing, whatever, and
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something about that time that was just so exciting. So like to be a writer as part of that, aspect of it. Like I can imagine that must feel really cool to know that you got to leave a mark on
Well,
that kind of.
it was definitely fun to get the magazine and see my article in print, with my byline and be able to like, save it. Like all of my articles are saved in, three ring binders inside of the plastic sheets, and so I'll always have those. A lot of them were before the internet. And, like everything, all things must pass, as George Harrison said, right? And move on to something else. I mean, I stopped writing about music so long ago that it's like ancient history. I don't really feel that connected to it anymore because now I write about art and design and
Mhm.
lifestyle and, you know, trends, toys, things like that. I, I'm not into any new music at all, but I did just write about the Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii video is coming out, I think next week or the week after. So I just wrote a little thing about that from the press release, and that was kind of fun. That kind of took me back to the old days.
In movie theaters. That's going to be so
It's
incredible.
going to be great. Absolutely. Well, and last week I took myself to see Becoming Led Zeppelin, which was, have you seen it yet? It's
No.
so good. It's so amazing. It's riveting because, these guys are all pushing 80 if they're not already 80,
Mm.
and they are sharp like these things just happened to them. They can talk about everything that's ever happened in their career, and they're funny and witty and insightful, and it was amazing. I definitely recommend you try and see it if it's playing in any theaters near you.
It actually is. And I think I'm going to try to make a little day date with myself to go see it at some point because I would love to see that. And it's so funny because you were talking about Zeppelin and your interview list has been like impressive, if not made me kind of jealous at times. But you got to interview John Paul Jones.
Yeah, that was really fun.
Like, tell me about that. Well, first off, how the hell does someone get an interview with John Paul Jones, and what was it like?
It was for one of his solo albums. I want to say the album was called The Fire Thief, but I may not be exactly right about that. I can't even remember how long ago it was, but his publicist, her name was Jane. She either contacted me or I knew who she was, and I just wrote to her and said, I would love to interview him for this album. And she set it up. And I went to his hotel in New York. She was there, but we were in a separate room. And I just had my little mini cassette recorder. I had written a page or two of questions because I always did a really excellent prep. I never did, I'm just going to wing it. No, I always was meticulously prepared. And I had all kinds of questions about Led Zeppelin, about like some of the producing he'd done. And at the time, rock and roll had just been on a commercial for Cadillac cars. So I asked him about licensing that. And I remember he goes, well, they didn't get it for free. And he produced like the first Cinderella album. So I asked him about that. And he's like, ha ha ha, Cinderella. So he was super down to earth and funny, and he put me at ease because I'm like, this guy is just a dude, and he has no pretense at all about being in like the greatest rock band of all time, right? So it was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, it was pre-camera, so I don't have a photo, but I did bring my first Led Zeppelin album, and he signed it, so that was nice.
Oh, you better hold tight to that one.
Yeah, it's in a frame on my wall.
And it's funny because for someone like me who, I interview a lot of folks, and I think I was telling you earlier, it was that, I interviewed Herman Rarebell from the Scorpions.
Yeah.
That is probably the most iconic musician I have interviewed to date, next to him and Dennis Dunaway from Alice
Okay.
Cooper's band.
Uh,
And those two interviews kind of choked me a little bit going into them because my first thought was like, what the hell can I ask these people that they haven't been asked a gazillion times? And I think that kind of like what you said is that, I know some of my writer friends tend to say like, oh, I'm just going to kind of wing it, or I don't over prep or whatever. It's like, no, I actually do go online and I like watch YouTube interviews and what questions are getting asked a ton, and whatever. And I'm like, okay, how can I come at this in a way that I don't bore them or whatever? And it's always surprised me that they still don't mind talking a lot about some of the things because it's part of their lives and it's part of their what sculpted them into what they are.
Uh,
Did you find that with John Paul Jones? Was it like, how hard were you trying to steer away from not asking too many obvious questions? And
I I haven't reread that interview in a while, so I don't remember exactly what I asked him. But I just remember that I tried to have a broader conversation about his career rather than specific questions about different things. Like if you ask an open-ended question that's not just going to get like a one sentence answer, sometimes they'll go off onto a tangent and you'll find out something that you never knew you didn't know, Like said you talked to Dennis Dunaway. I've interviewed Dennis Dunaway and he is not only a brilliant musician, but the nicest guy in the world and is like a dude. He's not
incredible.
he's not stuck up, he's not pretentious. He's just a cool guy that will tell you stories and laugh with you and is very gracious. He's terrific. He's somebody else that as long as you know what you're talking about, you can ask him pretty much anything.
He was fantastic because he had just put out the book.
Oh, okay.
What was it called?
Isn't it called like snakes, guillotines, and something?
Snakes and Guillotines. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic, of course. And I just happened to just be like, you know what? I wonder what would happen if I just messaged him on Facebook. I didn't know who his PR person was or anything. Messaged him. He literally messages me right back. He's like, Don, thank you so much for reaching out. I'd love to talk to you. What are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, is this one of those fake accounts or is this
And
like real?
Neil Smith, the drummer from Alice Cooper, who's Dennis's brother-in-law, because Dennis is married to Neil's sister. That's how I met him. They had run a small article on him in like Magnet magazine or something about the fact
Mm-hmm.
that he was selling real estate.
Yeah.
And so I just, messaged him and he wrote me right back and yeah, let's do an interview. And we became really good friends. I've known him for like, 25 years or something like that. Totally nice guy.
And I love that because kind of going back to what you said earlier about how it's to me it's always really cool when you do make a connection with someone doing this
Mhm.
that kind of sparks something that says, you know what, like, or if they say like, I like you, I want to keep in touch with you and like talk to you. And I used to get overexcited about it sometimes to the point where it was disappointment, when it wouldn't last very long. But then I realized I was like, but even if it doesn't last for a long time, if it happened, that's a cool thing to hold on to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, John Tempesta is someone I've known, tenuously for also years and years after I think I interviewed him for Modern Drummer. We had a great interview and he's like, "Oh, you're like the sister I never had." And we like exchanged emails and then I ended up writing his bio. And then he hooked me up writing bios for a couple other people. And, sometimes if he comes to town with a cult, I'll, go see the band and say hi or something. And we'll like occasionally message each other on, Instagram or something,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like we're super close, but we have a friendly connection. He knows who I am, you know. Well, this is another Dennis Dunaway story because this was years ago. I was at a party at, I think it was a John Varvatos store somewhere in the village. And Dennis was there with his wife, Cindy. And we were talking and somebody else came up and a few people talking and they said to Dennis, "Do you know many people?" And he goes, "Well, I know Gail." I was like, I was like, wow.
Don't you love that? You're like, Dennis Dunaway knows me.
He's like, I think Ian Hunter was there. I think he said, "Well, I know Ian Hunter and I know Gail."
That's pretty amazing. It's Ian Hunter and then you, and then Dennis Dunaway. So I mean, because there was this whole other thing too about like when Almost Famous came out, that was one of the things that like I mean I was in my 20s obviously when it came out, but I was like so captured by that movie that I was like, oh, that's me. That would have been me. And so I kind of carried that with me. But also there were some kind of like little life lessons in there, like, between Lester Bangs and, William Miller. And when he says, don't
Uh-huh.
make friends with the rock stars, they're not your
Uh-huh.
friends. Like, did you ever find that to be a situation where like they liked you until you said something?
Well, that movie is very special to me also. And, you have to understand that Lester Bangs was a very curmudgeonly person, so of course he's going to say that to this young, impressionable writer. But I think the thing about making friends with the rock stars, quote unquote, is you have to just know what's really happening. Like don't romanticize it or fantasize it about, just take it as a personal connection,
Mm-hmm.
and don't expect more from them because you think they're magical or special or something like that. You
Right.
know, I mean, it's probably best not to get to have too many expectations of
Mm-hmm.
anything. Um, it kind of goes back, I think, to the thing about never meet your heroes because they'll only disappoint you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just need to be realistic. Go in as a professional to get the job done, and if a connection happens while that job is getting done, that's great. And
Mm-hmm.
it can happen a lot. It can be a thing that lasts and adds value to your life. But it's like any other relationship. They come and they go.
So when you were doing this with the musicians primarily, uh, were there ever any moments where like you were like, I don't know, where you kind of felt a little deflated or let down in a certain interview? And if so, like how did you handle that? And like,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Not many, fortunately, but there were maybe a handful of interviews where the person was really drunk or really
oh
high and
my gosh.
just wasn't able to conduct the interview, just was not physically able to do it. So that was disappointing. Not so much because I had, any love or admiration for this particular person, but just because I was disappointed because now I can't do my job. I've got to call my editor and say, I can't use this. This guy was drunk. He wouldn't answer my questions. What do we do? Do we scrap the idea? Do I try to talk to him again? And then there are other people that, maybe they're not in the mood to talk to you. So they'll give you short answers, or they'll be a little bit rude about what you asked. They don't like that question or something. So you can either, what's the word? You know, what is it when you're in your car and you go the wrong way and it says recalculating, recalculate?
Oh.
It's like you got to recalculate. Like, what do I have to do to get through 30 minutes or 20 minutes with this person?
Mhm.
And then sometimes they just have an agenda and they just want to talk about a certain amount of things or certain things. And you think you've got the greatest question and you ask them and they're like, well, I don't know about that, but I like these sticks that I use. So it's like, whatever.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have had some, luckily, I can only count them on one hand that I've had experiences like that. But like everywhere from, I mean, like I had one particular guitar player, I'm not going to name any names here, of course, that was like grunting on, like, and I was just like, is everything okay? And he's just like, man, just ask your questions. And I was like, all right, I said, I'll tell you what, we'll go ahead and wind this down now. And because again, I don't work for anybody, I didn't work
Uh,
for a publication,
yeah.
but I was trying, I always look at this like I try to do this to help the artist, to support them, but also because I enjoy it. I'd
Yeah.
have to email these PR people when they would be like, when's the interview going up? And I'm like, it's not. This is what happened. Here, I'll send it to you to listen to, and if you like anything of it, you can edit it and post what you want,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had another interview where I showed up to interview somebody, and it was two members of this particular band, and they were doing cocaine, bouncing off the walls in the room, and like I could not even get a word in edgewise to ask a question. And finally, I hit my recorder. I just left it on the table running, ramble and run around and snort and whatever they wanted to do. And I walked out and I called their PR person like on the phone. I was like, I'm not even staying for the show. This was bad. Like this is not a great vibe.
Yeah, that's bad. What do they call it? Bad media
Yeah.
training.
And they weren't even a new band. Like this was I mean, they were like a band that's been around for at least 20 years at this point, you know? And I was just like, I can't even, yeah. I was like, I'd expect that from like new kids, you know, like,
Yeah.
green bands or whatever. But like, this was like supposed to be an established band. And I was like, how do these people get press at all? You know?
Yeah, that's someone's fault for even letting that happen. You know, I remember interviewing a new band from Australia, maybe, and you know, we it was like two or three guys in the band, and I think maybe their publicist was there also, and we were at a bar or a restaurant, and they just wouldn't get serious. They would just giggle and, ask me personal questions and stuff. So I just wrote the article about what assholes they were.
That's the
Because it,
best.
because it, it only, I think the word count was like 500 words. So it was
Uh-huh.
very easy to just say, you know, I went to interview such and such a band and I was misled. I think
Yeah.
I started out the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Ah,
And then
I
I
love
talked about what
that.
assholes they were. I said a little bit about their band and the end, and I get printed and I got paid and I was fine.
I know you and I talked one time about we had a mutual. We're not good again, not mentioning names, but of somebody who was very upset when given a bad review and like definitely like let their words be known when, they didn't like what you had to say. Was it ever hard for you to get messages or to get feedback like that from artists?
I don't think I ever had anyone tell me they didn't like something I did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, if it was someone that I was in touch with after the fact, I've only had positive feedback, like praise, emails. Sometimes the guys would send me flowers. Um, or you hear nothing,
Yeah.
and the publicist says thank you for the clip, and that's it.
Yeah.
It just really varies, but I've never had anyone say they didn't like what I wrote, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't usually write negative reviews because I usually wanted to say something nice. That one
Yeah.
article about that little, baby band who I don't know if they were ever heard from again was the only time when I was like, all right, if you can dish it out, you can take it, you know. I mean, I'm sure I told you I interviewed Rick Allen from Def Leppard, and he's an okay guy, but he's a disappointing interview because he just wants to talk about what he wants to talk about. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really want to answer questions, which is unfortunate, because I thought I had really good questions.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, whatever. He gave me enough information to write the article and it was fine, but it was
Mm-hmm.
not a memorable experience. It didn't elevate him in my esteem or anything like that. Like almost everybody else, you're done and you're like, wow, that was fantastic. You know, I got enough for a great article and I met a really cool person, and I learned something.
I think that that's been the experience for me also is that, excuse me, is that some of my better interviews were the ones that I weren't expecting to be
Uh-huh.
that good. And then some of the ones that I had such high hopes for, I'd be like, oh man, that didn't really go the way I wanted. But as I've done it more and more over the years, kind of like you said, I've gone in with zero expectations, unless it's someone I've talked to once already, that I know how to
Yeah.
expect
Uh-huh.
or how to connect with them already. But for the most part, even if it's someone like, again, like when I interviewed Herman Rarebell, I interviewed Tracy Guns last week also. And I was
Uh-huh.
like a huge fan of both, but I was like, I've got my questions.
Uh-huh.
This is what I'm going to do. We'll
Uh-huh.
see how it goes, And then, of course, once they get talking, you kind of get an idea of where it's going to go, and then you kind of let it flow, And I enjoy that, but I've learned my lesson as far as thinking like, oh my God, I love this guy. He's going to be a great interview, because it's such a disappointment when it's not.
Yeah, I had one guy say to me, is this going to go on much longer?" I was like, "No, we can wrap it up right
I
now.
wonder if that's the guy that I talked to that I was telling you about earlier. We'll
It's
have
going
to
to go on much longer."
but it's also kind of humbling in a way, you know, like I feel like I remember telling my wife once when I had this really bad interview that I was talking about, and she said, "But how many great ones have you had?" She's like, they can't all be great. She goes, "But you've had so many unusually good interviews." She goes, "I think it was time for you to have a bad one, you know, to kind of like shock your system a little bit."
You can't ride the wave forever, you know. Eventually, you got to have someone like bring you down to earth. But no, for the most part, look, I feel very blessed that I was ever able to do this. It's not something when I was a kid that I thought one day I'm going to interview famous rock stars. I never thought it would happen. I just, after you do it for a while, it just, especially if it's someone that you're not invested in personally, I think you can do almost a better job. Like someone like John Paul Jones or the guys from Duran Duran or Pete Steele from Typo Negative, someone that's like iconic, you're like, oh, holy shit, how do I how do I stay cool? You know what I mean? But all these guys were really, really nice, and very talkative and funny. And the more like off script you go, usually the better the interview is. Like I was interviewing Simon Le Bon on the phone, and I don't know if you've had this happen, but a lot of times when you're on the phone with somebody, unless you call them directly, their publicist is also on the phone. So that if you ask something that they don't want them to answer, they'll say, don't answer that, or something like that. So his publicist is on the phone. I'm on the phone with him. I believe it was the album, gee whiz, what was it called? Pop Trash, I think. And it had a song called Lava Lamp on it and a song called Electric Barbarella. And just like him and Nick Rhodes and like maybe Warren and one other guy in the band at the time. So they had sent out a press release that was the stupidest, most badly written press release I had ever seen. And it was like Duran Duran, the innovators of the model musician phenomena. And I'm like, well, I'm going to ask him about that. So I said, so Simon, I'm looking at your press release here and it says, Duran Duran, model musician phenomena. And he's like, what? What? And he goes, Mary, are you on the phone? And she's like, yeah. And he goes, where did you get this? First of all, it's bad writing. Second of all, it opens us up to a ridiculous amount of lampooning. And I'm like, well, I'm so glad I brought it up. So, that was something that I certainly didn't expect to happen. He had no idea that this was out there and he was horrified. So it just added this richness to the whole interview that nobody else got. If you can get a moment like that, it's very special.
When you can have an experience like that as a writer, like it is bar none one of the coolest feelings. I was set to interview the vocalist slash guitar player of a band, and I interviewed them before they took off, and yeah, just directly, and it was great. And then they got signed and they started doing some bigger things, and I was told by their PR person that I wouldn't cut it because I didn't have numbers and things like this. So I go to the show to see said band, to do a review. And the guy sees me and says, how come we didn't do an interview? And I was like, well, I said, I put in for one. I said, but your PR person said, and he was like, bollocks, come with me. Puts me on the bus. We sat down, had an hour and 20-minute conversation, recorded on my cell phone because I didn't have anything else. And it was so fantastic. And he gives me his number and he's like, anytime you want to talk to me, just text me and we'll talk, and we ended up becoming good friends. But again, I had the best interview from that, because
so great.
We kind of talked about that, where it was kind of like this kind of concept of gatekeeping. Of course, it kind of got me blacklisted by this PR person, but at the same time, I kind of felt cool. Like I felt like I did this kind of rogue thing, and he was able to connect it with like the old school days of like writing for zines and stuff, and how like, you didn't go through the business. You went and hung out at the back of the venue until someone came out and said, hey, can I talk to you? So it's such a great vibe when that happens.
Well, after a while, I never got too big for my shoes, but I did realize that press needs us more than we need them, because there are a million bands that you can interview, but there's a very small pool of people that are doing what we did at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So after a while, I thought I could pretty much ask for anything and get it. And I had a couple people turn me down, and even that turned into hilarious stories. Because one was, do you remember this band AFI? And I
Oh my
think the
gosh,
lead
yes.
singer was like
Oh,
Danny Flame or Danny some fucked up name
I
like
know
that.
who you're talking
And,
about. Yeah.
a magazine said, "Can you get an interview with AFI?" Sure, I can, no problem. I didn't know anything about them. I knew they were a band, but I wasn't a fan. I just was like, all right, you assign me this, I'll get the interview. So I called
Mhm.
them and they're like, oh, no, we can't give you this interview because you're not big enough. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I was like, okay, whatever. And then another time I asked for an interview, a Rob Zombie interview, and the publicist turned me down. And I went to write to my editor to say what an asshole the publicist was, and I sent it to the publicist. I mean, because of course I did. So he's like, well, I hope you realize that you're really not getting the interview now. So I wrote a story about that, you know?
That
And it's like at the end, I think I said, and I hope one day I will meet Rob Zombie and he will ask me to tell him this story because it would be my pleasure.
well, did you ever get to meet Rob Zombie and tell him the
No,
story?
no, no. But just it's like you have to turn it into something positive because who cares? There's a million rock stars to talk to. And look, all respect to Rob Zombie, it wasn't about him. It was about his asshole publicist.
Hmm.
And I think there was something else to this story too. But the main point was that I screwed myself by sending the email to the publicist, which is why you double check your
Who you're
reply to
replying
all
to?
things.
Exactly.
Oh my God. Um, but you know, like I interviewed Al Jorgensen and Paul Barker of Ministry,
Hmm.
and I met them in the bar of their hotel, and I sat between them with my tape recorder, and we had the best interview. And that interview is full of so many inside jokes that we just made up on the spot between the three of us. And then at the end of it, they're like, "Well, we're going to go to dinner with our wives. Do you want to come with us?" Yeah, I want to come with you. Okay. So it was crazy. It was so much fun. I'll never forget it. And I ended up I interviewed Paul once on his own, Paul and Al together once, and Al once again on his own. And one time when I was in LA, I was with a friend of mine who loves ministry, and I said, "Hey, do you want to go visit Al Jorgensen and his wife? I think they live around here." And so I called him up and I'm like, "Hey, I'm with my friend. She loves you. Are you guys home?" They're like, "Yeah, come on over." And they gave us, he gave us cowboy hats that he had. And I mean, she still talks about it like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that we just went to Al Jurgensen's house and hung out with him." That's kind of shit is fun.
I make zero money doing this. I don't think I've ever made $1 doing this at all. But you know what though? I had enough stories that I wrote a book and then I'm writing another one. You know what I mean? Like it's those are the things you can't put a price on because at the end of the day, it can either be a job or it can be an adventure.
People that people that write for big magazines don't even make a living doing this. They do other things. Like they produce television shows or they write books or they manage bands. It's like nobody makes a living writing except Stephen King. It's just there's no money in it. It's like the money I make off my website is all from selling advertising. It's more money than I ever made writing, that's for sure. But I have, tons of clips and tons of, photos with people and signed photos and cool swag. And that's a whole lifetime of memories that I can cherish and, tell stories about and stuff that a lot of people don't have.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because like I've got my backstage pass collections framed behind me. I've got like my signed vinyl records from people, and like you said, like those every now and then I'll pull them out and I'll just look at them and read the little notes that people have written on them for me.
Yeah, I call them my trophies.
That's exactly what it is.
It's like here's a doodle that Slash did for me when we were talking in a bar.
See, it's people like me who you tell this, I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm not gonna be like, how much did you make? I'm gonna be like, that's fucking great. Dude, you got to hang out with Sly,
I think the most money I ever made was I wrote a cover story for Request magazine, which was the free magazine they gave out at Sam Goody. It was on Sum 42, a band I did not even like, and I think I made $500. Which I was like, oh my God, $500. It's like, it's not about the money, it's about the trophy.
In 2003, you launched the Worley Gig
Yes.
blog, right? And so you kind of transitioned out of music and kind of went more into like arts, lifestyle, fashion, all based around like being in New York City.
Well, my website was originally about music because Worley Gig
Right.
started out as a print column, and then it became an online column, and first it was the New York Hangover. It was
Mm-hmm.
print. Then it was a monthly column on Pandemonium Online, which was out of Seattle. Then it was on Star Polish, which was like about growing artists'
Mm-hmm.
careers. And then I took the brand and I made it my website. So there was some music stuff on it originally, but it was never, I wasn't doing original music writing for it. I was using it to promote the writing that I was doing for other magazines, like, oh, Gail and Modern Drummer, April. This month I interviewed John Tempesta and Morgan Rose,
Mm-hmm.
get it on a magazine stand in your local town kind of thing. And then when I stopped writing about music, I'm like, well, I'm just going to write about what I really like. Since I'm not going to make any money, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
write about art and design. And, maybe occasionally I'll see a band and I'll write about it.
So what kind of led to that transition out of talking about music
Not
primarily?
liking any new music,
Oh yeah,
hating,
that's
hating music. Yeah, I just was like, after the whole new metal thing happened, I was like, I don't like any of this stuff. And I don't like girl singers. And I'm not going to write about country music. So I guess I just am not writing about music anymore, you know?
mm-hmm.
And the Beatles aren't recording anymore. So,
And Zeppelin's not together.
you know, it just was about there wasn't any source material that I was interested in. And if you're not making any money and there is no passion, what is the point? To torture yourself?
Oh, that's
I
yeah.
mean, I want to have fun. I want to create something that I'm proud of that gives me pleasure.
So you were a California girl. Like, how the hell did you end up in New York?
Well, I had this is a fun story. When I was 15 years old, oh, this kind of ties in today. Today is March 9th. This is I call it my Queen anniversary. It's the anniversary of the first time I saw Queen on the night at the Opera Tour in 1976. So, however many years ago that was. I was totally into Queen, totally into that album, loved Freddie Mercury, had no idea he was gay. And Queen was like a religion or like a lifestyle to me. And I joined their fan club. And in the fan club magazine, they had a page where you could send your address and get a pen pal. So I became pen pals with this woman named Ivy Vale, whose father was the Time to Make the Donuts guy, Mike Vale. Which of course I didn't know at the time. I just knew she was Queen fan and lived in New York, and we became pen pals. And then after a few years, I came to New York to visit her, and I would come to New York every year or every couple of years, and I would stay with her for a week or so, and I just fell in love with New York, and so one year I was having kind of a bad time in California. I guess I was around 27 years old or something, and Ivy says, why don't you come to New York for a couple weeks? You can stay with me. You can have a break. So on that trip, I just said, I'm going to move here. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm going to move here. So it took a year for me to get my shit together and move to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I was kind of over California. I didn't want to have to drive anymore. I wasn't having any luck with relationships and I hated my roommate. I just wanted to start a new life.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved to New York with like four suitcases and found a roommate in the back of Village Voice. And struggled for a couple years until I finally started making some money as a secretary. And yeah, and just like pulled myself up by the bootstraps kind of thing. And now I'm living large.
Oh, so I was so psyched when we got the chance to hang out on my first visit to New York ever.
Yes, that was lovely.
I don't think I realize how slow paced Southern I am because I never think of even though I was born and raised in the
Uh,
Southeast, I never think of myself as a super Southern person until
uh,
I went to New York. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, I do not move fast enough. I do not have enough personal space. I don't have any of the stuff that I need. But I loved it though. And that was kind of, and the fun, and before we talked, I found a quote from Levon Helm of the band from
yeah.
The Last Waltz. And he said this about New York. He said, so it took a couple of trips to get into it. You just go in the first time and you get your ass kicked and you take off. But as soon as it heals up, you come back and you try it again. Eventually, you fall right in love with it. Like, is that pretty accurate?
And New York isn't for everybody, but if you love it, you love it. And if you don't, you don't. You know, you were talking about I don't move fast enough. I saw a meme on Instagram. It said New Yorkers are the only people that get road rage when they're walking. I was like, yeah, that's true.
I was just like, I've never been around so many people at one time that wasn't at a concert. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I think the last time was like Mardi Gras in New Orleans, but like this is like just a random Sunday, and I'm just like, there are so many people here. But it was such a fascinating thing to me that I could totally see how, like, with the Worley gig, that there's never something to not write about. Like,
Oh, yeah,
I mean, I would assume that
absolutely.
there's never a day where you're like, oh, I have nothing to talk about. Like, you could probably just walk out your front door and like have a story.
That's funny because today when I went out to run my errands, I was like, God, I don't have anything interesting to post on Instagram because I went to Toy Fair last week and I've been posting a lot about that. And I thought, let's post something that's not a toy. And I saw a chalkboard sign in front of a bar and it said, now serving, but they had spelled serving like serve and ving. So it's subverving. And I'm like, that doesn't look right to me. So I took a picture of it and I put it on Instagram and I wrote a little story about it, So yeah, you just make shit up, as you go along.
I mean, so being in New York, like you said, like, so you've been in here there for quite a while now. I mean, like, it's home for you. I mean, do you ever get tired? Like, do you ever just feel it
Tired.
sometimes?
I'm tired all the time, Don.
Ah,
I'm never not tired. I you know, I love New York. I love being outside, but I spend a lot of time in my house
yeah.
on my own, alone, without any other stimulation because I need my downtime. Because when you go outside, everybody's in your face immediately, you
Hmm.
know. And I go to my office for my day job 3 days a week, and that's like on the subway and off the subway and on the street and in the office, and you're around people all day long. So I need a couple days of hiding in my house
Just to kind
and
of,
decompressing so that I can go back out and have an adventure again the next day.
I love that because that's exactly how I feel. No matter where I live at, is it like, if I have a show to cover, I go to shows or whatever, I would tell these my friends, I was like, I'm not going to ride with you. I'm not going to after party with you. I'm not going to pregame with you. I will meet you at the show. I'm going to stand in the dad section and I'm going to nurse my one Heineken all night. And then when the show's over, unless I have an interview, I'm in my car, I'm going home. Like, I need that time to just not be around all that people and the stimulation.
Sometimes it's hard to leave the house. If I'm going to go out, I have to already be out. Like if I'm in my day job, I can go from there. Or if there's a little bit of a gap, I can go do something else and then do something. But if I go home, I'm probably not going to be able to leave the house again.
Mm.
It's really hard to do.
Once you're in, you're in. That's how I am.
It's like my bra is off. I'm staying in. It can't go back on till tomorrow morning. I can't leave the house.
Oh, come on. You can rock the braless hippie girl thing. Come
No,
on.
no, I can't. or at least it's a good excuse, you know.
The Worley Gig is awesome. And one of the things I do love about it is that even if you don't live in New York, like I feel like you can get a glimpse of just a bit of life there from someone on the inside, as opposed to having it feel so overwhelming and so, I don't know. Like before I went to New York, I spent a lot of time reading the blog, and I just remember going like, oh, okay, there's like things to do that are kind of on the fringe that aren't going to put me in like large touristy kind of situations. And
Uh,
so is that your kind of goal with the blog in general?
well, I call it a blog of neat things. And I just like to share stuff that I enjoy. So whether it's a piece of art or a piece of furniture, because I love furniture. I love to write about furniture. Um, or, I found some great tacos somewhere, or I went to an art gallery, or saw a neat public artwork. Um, just something funny or cool to share with people. And sometimes if it's art, maybe you can see that art in your town. Maybe it's an exhibit that's going to come to Los Angeles or Chicago or wherever. It doesn't necessarily have to be just about New York, or it's a little bit of education. Like, here's an example. Like last week, I wrote about this Noguchi coffee table, and Noguchi was Isamu Noguchi, who was a Japanese designer. He was in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. He got out, he became an amazing artist and designer and created all these iconic designs. And you might look at this coffee table, which has wooden legs and a glass top, and go, it's a coffee table. But no, it's a work of art. And there's a lot of history behind it. And look at all these other designers that were influenced by his designs, you know, that kind of thing. It's just a little bit of, it's like a little Wikipedia.
I love that because I also take that as a good bit of inspiration from you, in the sense that, yeah, being a music writer, is that, like you said, I'm not a big fan of a lot of modern music at all. And if there is modern music that I like, it's modern music that sounds old, which I love. But sometimes I just feel like, oh, I don't have anything to write about. But the thing is that there is always something to write about. And if you love writing about it, you should just write about it without
Yeah.
the concern of, oh, is anyone going to read this or not?
Oh, I never think anybody's going to read anything I write. I just do it for myself. I honestly don't expect anybody to. I'm always, oh my God, look, I have people are looking at the blog right now. It, I just do it for myself because it's fun and because it's kind of a work of my work of art, that I contribute and I work on it and I, give it a lot of love and a lot of care and hope that it resonates with someone and sometimes it does.
Gail, thank you so much for talking so long with me about this. I love you so much.
I love you, Dawn. It's a love fest.
It's a total love fest. And
Yes.
love fest. Look, I'm taking my bra off. So, well, so everybody needs to check out the Worley Gig website. That's www.worleygig.com.
Worley.
Worley. That's correct. And everyone check it out. If you don't live in New York City, it's a great glimpse into this lifestyle and the great things to do. And if you do live in New York City, then maybe you'll still find something new.
There's something for everyone.
There is something for everyone, without a doubt. But again, you're the best. I love you, and thank you for doing this, Gail.
Dawn, it was my pleasure. We'll do it again some other time.